Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next half hour, we'll take you through your key business news stories right across the African continent, from Cairo to Johannesburg and Lagos to Nairobi. Here's what's coming. The IMF sounds a warning on South Africa a day before a potential downgrade. We'll be looking at the prospects of a continental free trade area, sampling views from Uganda. And later on, we'll introduce you to Malian designers who want to make Bamako one of the centers of African fashion. Let's begin with the International Monetary Fund. It has warned South African authorities to remain vigilant on inflation, even though falling oil prices and cuts in government deficits may give the country's Reserve Bank some headroom for accommodative monetary policy. Africa's most advanced economy has been struggling to grow ever since a 2009 recession, but the central bank has said interest rates will have to gradually rise. So far in 2014, the Reserve Bank has raised interest rates by 75 basis points as inflation rose well above the 3 to 6% target band. Now, large fiscal and current account deficits have made the rand vulnerable to portfolio inflows during bouts of global risk aversion, and the IMF recommends building reserves in order to boost South Africa's ability to cope. Now, South Africa's rand started weakening a lot last month after the US announced an end to its quantitative easing program. Now, it came under further pressure this week. We covered that extensively after the South African Reserve Bank data showed a smaller than expected reduction in the current account deficit. Now, that's in turn sent it tumbling to its worst level in 6 years. There's now growing concern, especially in the manufacturing sector, that a weaker rand can only spell doom. Sumitra Naidu filed this report on a sector that's also held ransom by sporadic union strikes.
The rand slumped to 11.59 against the dollar this week, a level last seen in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. While the global economy is showing signs of a recovery, South Africa's economic woes are mounting. A current account deficit that is way too big, high unemployment, low growth and power supply constraints are all weighing heavily on the currency. Economists predict it will soon be trading at 13 rand to the dollar.
There has to be electricity available, there has to be infrastructure, and the exchange rate, most importantly, has to be stable, because manufacturers won't expand if there's no confidence that the exchange rate will remain at that kind of competitive level.
South Africa has maintained it will not interfere in the free trade of the currency. It instead uses inflation targeting to help stabilize the economy and spur growth.
The problem with inflation targeting is that it focuses excessively on one of the variables in the economy, and there are other variables that are also very important. Having a competitive and stable real exchange rate is extraordinarily important if South Africa is going to diversify its economy, develop manufacturing, have sustained economic growth that's associated with job creation.
But the manufacturing sector has come under immense pressure since the financial crisis in 2008, slumping by 13.5% in 2009. It increased by 4.7% in 2010, but it has never recovered to pre-crisis levels. The manufacturing sector dropped as low as 1.4% last year, but is currently showing an upward trend at 4%.
It's a crucial variable for manufacturers across the world, particularly in South Africa, however, and that's why we really have to look at it quite carefully and really make sure we understand what would be an appropriate level for the exchange rate to be stabilized at.
The country's growth path strategy, the National Development Plan, talks of the need for a stable and competitive exchange rate to revive the manufacturing sector. While government says there are no immediate plans to change policy, the costs of a more stable exchange rate is being investigated.
So what we've done today is really the first step in the journey of discussing what is the impact of the exchange rate on the real economy in particular. What is it that developing country governments can do to improve the performance of the manufacturing sector? How can we create jobs?
A weak currency has proved beneficial for some countries. China, for example, has a thriving export market. But will it work in South Africa?
The lower exchange rate means that the exporters get more rand when they export goods on a competitive international market. But it will only be a benefit if some other policies are also pursued.
The manufacturing sector is starting to show some improvement, but it remains to be seen whether it will gain from the weaker rand or slump again as input costs rise. Right now, the effects of a softer currency are being offset by declining oil prices. Sumitra Nadu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Now then, let's expand this conversation around South Africa. It's going to be a bit of a theme for the bulletin today and tomorrow. Sumitra Naidu joins us live from Johannesburg. Miriam Bemard is live in London. Sumitra, let's start with you. The IMF is urging South Africa to speed up labour market reforms. Do we know exactly what form these proposed reforms will take?
Well, you know, Rama, the IMF has the belief that, there could be more labour flexibility in South Africa. And it has been calling for a rein-in of trade unions, if you would call it that. It wants government to not necessarily take control of the unions, but to better the relationship and find a better balance in terms of the debates and the demands. So the IMF has recommended lower wage demands. It raised its concerns about the massive wage demands being made in various sectors. It also supports the use of labour brokers. This has been a raging hot debate in South Africa for some time now, and in a lot of the wage protests that we saw earlier this year, the unions were demanding the scrapping of labour brokers. So the IMF is really looking for a social bargain, so to say, that would pull together trade unions, business and government.
Indeed, arguments of the union, of course, the unions rather in South Africa, not particularly receptive to. Miriam, as a percentage of GDP, South Africa's debt has nearly doubled since 2008. If its ratings are cut to junk, how would that affect debt service by government?
Well, Rama, the IMF is suggesting that South Africa adopt a formal debt target to strengthen its budget framework, considering its debt could reach more than 53% of GDP in the next 4 years. Other analysts very much agree with that, after speaking to quite a few, saying that the government needs to make more adjustment to ensure public debt stabilizes and is reduced to safer levels. Many foreign investors are saying that they're worried about South Africa's fiscal gap. That's about 4% this year, despite the government saying it's hoping to push it down to 2.5%. And experts told me that more aggressive measures are needed, but investors are still very confident in South Africa, given its flexible exchange rate has served as a buffer against capital outflows, but say boosting the level of reserves will boost South Africa's resilience against market movements.
Indeed. Sumitra, let's focus on the monetary policy argument here. Might a rate cut tomorrow by S&P spur the South African Reserve Bank to raise rates sometime in the first half of 2015?
Well, Rama, it's hard to tell at this rate. Just a few months ago, the South African Reserve Bank hiked rates, confirming that the rate hiking cycle had begun, as inflation was still at the end of the 6% target. At that time, the Reserve Bank said it couldn't hold back on rate hikes anymore. But since July, much has changed. Inflation has eased to 5.8% and is forecast to come down further. Oil prices have fallen significantly and growth, of course, is weaker than expected. With a broadened mandate to help stimulate growth and assist with job creation, it's likely that the Reserve Bank may hold off a little longer on hiking rates. However, if the rand continues to weaken at the rate it is weakening that we saw in the last few weeks, that all might change.
Indeed. Miriam, in the last 3 rounds of cuts from the ratings agencies, the 3 guys, Moody's, S&P and Fitch, the contingent liabilities that the state would have to take on as part of infrastructure expenditure was always raised as a concern. Now that Eskom does need state support in order to run next year, how does this change the ratings picture?
Well, Well, speaking to experts, it's actually not causing great concern at the moment, Brahma. You know, some analysts say the measures show that South Africa's government is actually taking firmer charge of its struggling state-owned enterprises, but also looking at new opportunities to boost things like renewable resources. The overall picture for South Africa remains stable, despite, of course, the 0.6% contraction we saw in Q2. And experts warn that South Africa will have to reduce its exposure to global financial shocks, as Samisha was saying, lower oil prices as well, but also it is the most liquid and traded emerging market, or one of, and it needs to reduce its vulnerability after being lumped with what was deemed the fragile 5 emerging markets last year, with its strong ties, of course, to European manufacturing sector and the ongoing slowdown in commodity prices that we've been seeing.
Indeed. Final question to you, Sumitra. After today's cabinet meeting, the Deputy President is now apparently in charge of efforts to turn around several state-run enterprises, South African Airways and Eskom among them. Can you give us more on his specific targets?
Well, as you said, the announcement just came out today, but I think the biggest task for the Deputy President right now is really to stabilize these companies financially. Both Eskom and SAA, out of all those state enterprises, are in deep financial trouble. They have been for a long time, but the situation, of course, has worsened to such an extent that SAA, for example, is near complete collapse. Eskom is running out of cash fast and may not be able to continue with its build program unless it gets money. So I think the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, is going to have to be behind that in order to get that money, to get these companies financially stable so that they get up to speed. So government has come up with a 5-point plan for Eskom. Over the next 30 days, the cogeneration contracts will be extended with private companies. Government will look for ways to substitute diesel with gas. It will also implement energy-efficient technologies at all government buildings, really immediate plans to relieve the power grid. In terms of SAA, we know that the Treasury is now going to take over here, and we're hoping to get more details on that in the coming days.
Indeed. We'll have to leave there for the time being. Thank you very much for your input. Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg and Miriam Bemard live in London. They will join us again in tomorrow's programme, of course, once the rating decisions do come in. We're still in South Africa, however. The country, as Sumitra just mentioned, plans to increase diesel and gas imports in a bid to get its chronic electricity shortage under control. Now, the government will also be signing a deal to set up a private sector coal-fired power plant, and it's due to be launched sometime next year. South Africa is currently suffering from its worst power shortages since 2008 due to a combination of poor forward planning, aging infrastructure, power plant failures and emergency maintenance, or more accurately, a lack of it. The country will also be importing gas from neighbouring Mozambique, and it will increase diesel imports to plug the current generation gap. Eskom says it needs to continue rolling blackout, however, in order to prevent a collapse of the entire grid. Elsewhere in West Africa, some economists are calling on the Nigerian government to restructure the country's economy and isolate oil reserves. Oil and natural gas make up almost all of Nigeria's exports and up to 80% of government revenue, according to IMF data. Now, analysts fear that further falls in the price of oil could then plunge the populous West African nation's economy into a financial crisis. One way to prevent that, however, would be to then separate oil reserves from the general economy. At the same time, the Minister of Finance, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, maintains that Nigeria has enough funds to keep government running, but she has warned of a tax hike on luxury items and a ban on non-essential government travel.
I think that what is crucial is that we must develop a plan, an economic plan, that will allow us effectively restructure the economy and find a way to gradually isolate oil revenues from the general economy, so that the oil revenue, when it comes, it can be regarded, as it were, as an additional source of investable funds, which can be dedicated, so that the general running of government and all that, that we are able to find other sources of revenue to address that.
We are going to see the expenditure of the federal government this time go from about 4.8 trillion. We'll give you all these numbers in a press release, so don't worry. 4.8 trillion initially submitted in the MTEF to about 4.66 trillion this time around. So obviously revenues total overall revenues for the Federation, the revenues for the federal government, and the expenditures will be impacted by the drop of the benchmark from 78 to 73.
Now, as far as the markets are concerned, there was an absolute bloodbath right across the board, especially in Nigeria. The all-share index there down by 3.5% in trading today. Similar losses seen in Egypt. That was down over 2 percentage points. The JSE and the Nairobi Securities Exchange both much lower, but not on the same order of magnitude. In Kenya, Kenya's NIC Bank, of course, announcing that its third right issue was oversubscribed to the tune of 121%. It did manage to raise about $23.2 million. Coming up next, Uganda's underwriters risk their money in Kampala's dangerous motorcycle taxis. We'll have the details next.
This is the first year that Africa will have more foreign direct investment than aid. And it's like the tipping point in terms of changing the way the continent is perceived. And I think this summit very much responds to that call. Now, whether it can materialize what is being announced is something that we'll have to check and see whether it happens.
On the 11th of December, you're still watching Global Business Africa. Let's take you to Uganda, specifically a set of two-wheeled vehicles in Uganda. They're the most commonly used form of transport in the capital, but incidentally, they also happen to be one of the most dangerous over there. Now, insurance companies in the country are trying to partner with public motorcycle riders to offer some safety and increase insurance penetration. Over 70,000 motorcyclists operate within the capital without insurance, at great risk to themselves and their passengers. Isabel Nakiria has more.
Ugandan insurers now have boda-bodas on board. It's the first time the insurance industry is providing comprehensive cover to riders in Kampala. To benefit from the cover, riders have to be part of an association of boda-bodas called Kampala Metropolitan Boda-Boda Association. The insurance industry said the more they can attract, the better for everyone.
It's about the numbers game. Because for us, if you look at the limits that we are offering in terms of the cover we are giving them, and the prices also we are charging as premium for the covers that we are offering them, it's all about a game of numbers.
The cost will be $17 annually to cover both the rider and their passengers. Fewer than 1% of people in Uganda have insurance, and the industry wants to increase that number with new and unique coverage ideas, like the partnership with boda-bodas. Local police records show there are over 7,000 boda-boda related accidents each year. The insurance cover is expected to cater for hospital costs of up to $400 and funeral expenses in case of death of up to $800.
We think this will work well because many riders die, get fractures, fall sick, but we cannot afford treatment. We have now discovered that insurance companies can provide this.
It's compulsory for every motorcyclist in Uganda to pay a third-party insurance of $18 annually, but this only covers the passenger. Boda-boda riders say that isn't worth it.
It would only benefit a rider not to be arrested by a traffic officer, but not benefiting from any. There's no way I can tell you that I benefited in this package. I've been driving a boda-boda since 2006, and I've been paying that third party.
Traffic laws in Uganda require riders and passengers to wear helmets, but many don't comply. Under the comprehensive cover, it's mandatory for both rider and passenger to wear helmets.
And the idea really is to help them develop, is to help them make sure that they develop, they become better in terms of their lifestyles, in terms of their own economic development. Because let's say a boda-boda loses their boda-boda through an accident and there's no one to pay it back and get it back on the road. What happens? maybe they have 2, 3 kids and a wife. It means they are back to square to zero.
At least 45,000 border riders registered under the association that is partnering with the insurance companies stand to benefit. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Kampala.
African leaders are set to launch the continent's largest free trade area in February next year. The tripartite free trade zone brings together the East African community, the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa, and the Southern African Development Community. From Kampala, here's Michael Beleke.
The tripartite free trade area will be the largest economic bloc on the continent. It will provide the free movement of goods, services, people and capital. It will also act as the launch pad for the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area in 2017, which will include West Africa. The move is hoped would undo more than half a century of tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade across Africa.
Time has come to open up that space. Let us compete and adapt or die. Those who are inefficient have to die. It's good. It's not necessarily a bad thing to let them die, that business. They'll reinvent themselves. They'll evolve.
The expanded integrated market of 26 countries will have a combined population of more than 600 million people. Trade experts believe this will improve Africa's competitiveness in the world market.
For Africa, having that bigger market, and it will help us to negotiate with Europe, the European Union, with US. It gives us more bargaining power as a continent.
However, there is concern that the idea of an expanded African market needs to be met with solid infrastructure across the bloc, something which is yet to be realized.
We need to think deeper about this market, bigger market, because at the end of the day, the larger market, the coherent larger market, should serve the people of Africa, not outsiders. And that won't be automatic. It has to have laws, policies in place to make it happen.
The Grand Pact will account for half of the membership of the African Union and 58% of the continent's gross domestic product, amounting to over $1.2 trillion US. The greatest value of an African free trade zone would be to add the possible clout of the continent to any country's efforts to level the playing field in its dealing with a foreign power, whether it's Washington, Brussels or Beijing. However, experts suggest that for Africa to fully benefit, some countries need to put their houses in order, especially on issues of governance.
We need good leadership. We need strong institutions. We need to deal with corruption. Corruption is a cancer that's in our midst, and if it's treated early, we'll contain it. If we wait until it's late, it becomes malignant.
Discussions are ongoing to speed up negotiations on trade-related areas, including trade in services, intellectual property, and a competition policy to ensure equity among all citizens of the wider region. Michael Beleke, CCTV, Kampala.
Not much to be said with regard to commodity prices. A trend we've been observing all the way since June is still very much in force. Brent crude prices well under $65 a barrel. They have posted a slight recovery from the 63.87 numbers you're seeing on your screen now. It's about 64.56, but still generally well under 65. Up next, prepare to meet young designers from Mali. They want to make Bamako the center of African fashion. We'll tell you how next. Welcome back to the program. 11 young Malian designers teamed up to showcase the country's eclectic and rich fashion heritage by staging a weekend-long fashion show aimed at showcasing traditional and contemporary designs for the international market. The focus of the show is fashion made in Mali, based on local cloth. This, of course, is part of a bid to try and establish a modern fashion industry in Mali.
A fusion of traditional cloth and contemporary designs on display. If these designers had their way, Mali's capital Bamako will soon become one of the continent's fashion centers. Despite the country's recent political instability, young designers are confident that fashion can become a valuable sector in Mali.
The government of Mali has utterly forgotten to train young Malians, which means there is no proper structure for vocational training. This is why the fashion sector in Mali doesn't work. And that is why I came back to Mali to revolutionize this sector. We really need professional training in fashion that is tailored for the youth.
Mali produces more than 436,000 tons of raw cotton a year, but only 1% is processed locally. Analysts say the lack of textile infrastructure hampers the growth of the fashion industry.
For the Crossroad Fashion event, we put strong emphasis on local products from Mali, and that is how we came up with this event, a fashion show showcasing Mali's talented designers.
Organizers say they plan to make the fashion show an annual event, as well as setting up workshops to train young aspiring fashion designers. Carol Oyola, CCTV.
Let's make a quick run through currencies here for you. Again, pretty much the same trends holding very much in play in trading today. The Naira is still around 180, well outside the preferred target band of the CBN. The Kenyan shilling also hovering around 90.50, give or take. On the political front, however, and this is important for you if you're looking at Nigeria in the future, Muhammadu Buhari, former ex-military ruler of Nigeria, apparently winning the, on course for the presidential ticket for the opposition in Nigeria. Now, here's what we're working on for tomorrow's program. We'll take you to Sierra Leone. What effect are cases of Ebola having on that country's economy? We'll have an in-depth look at that. And we'll also be in Congo, Brazzaville. The government has partnered with a France-based oil company to introduce agriculture management skills to farmers over there. Sounds like an interesting mix, an eclectic one at that. We'll tell you what exactly they stand to benefit from. That's it for this edition of the program. Do remember to send your feedback to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. And of course, when we're offline, Facebook and Twitter are your ports of call. We'll see you in the next 23 hours. I'm Ramanya.